My name is Dana Ripper. I am one of the co-founders of the Missouri River Bird Observatory. Our mission is the conservation of birds and their habitats via science, education, and advocacy. One thing I wanted to show folks is this is our website, mrbo.org. You might have already seen this. You might have signed up for this webinar on our website, but you can do things like sign up for our email newsletter. We send that out about once a month. We do not inundate you with emails. Or you can look at upcoming events where we still have some virtual events that are easy for folks in, whatever geography to attend. And we're starting to have some more in-person events as well. So Sarah and I are also both involved with the Missouri Birding Society, which is one of the co-sponsors of this webinar. You can see more about MBS at mobirds.org. It's an old organization that is devoted to watching birds and recording them and tracking them in the state of Missouri. And then, of course, the Missouri Department of Conservation, of which Sarah is a part. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Sarah. She is our state ornithologist here in Missouri. She is an excellent ecologist and a really good friend, one of my favorite people in the whole world. So I'm excited to hear her update on the Modus project, one of the many things that she is doing for the conservation of birds in our state and throughout the ranges of our shared birds. So Sarah, I'm going to stop screen sharing and hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Let me get my screen shared here. Get situated. I have to show this. Yes, thank you, Dana, and ditto to you. You are one of my favorite people as well. I encourage everybody who's taken time out of their busy, busy lives to learn about Modus and hear about how awesome it is and all the good work we're doing in the state and in the Midwest and in the neotropics. So I appreciate your time very much. I'm humbled that you would take time to spend your part of your afternoon with us. I do encourage you to check out Missouri Birding Society and Missouri River Bird Observatory if you're here in the state and elsewhere. They're all great organizations with great leaders. So I encourage you to do that. So yes, I am the state ornithologist. I've been the state ornithologist for about the last 4 years. I've worked for the department for about 8. I'm from Missouri. And that's pretty much all the background I'm going to give on myself because I want to get into the nitty gritty of Modus and talk about it. So what we'll talk about today, first I want to acknowledge, you can see that there's a bazillion partners that have jumped into Modus. They have really taken the leap at varying levels. These logos and names clearly represent a broad suite of partners who've jumped in on grants we've written. They've placed stations, they've learned the technology, which is not always easy, or they've donated funds for station placement in the state for Modus stations. So I'm humbled by your partnership, and all of your assistance at whatever level has been appreciated here in the state. So what we'll cover today, I'm going to start from nothingness. I'm going to start for folks who have no idea about bird tracking or radio telemetry at all. So we're going to break it down to nothing and talk about intro to tracking wildlife, new technologies, and what Modus is, what can we learn, how does it add to conservation, what is Modus doing for us, and why have we invested in it and are trying to put up more and more stations. And then we'll talk about kind of goals for Missouri, the Midwest, and the neotropics, and then how all of us can help contribute to this effort in different ways. So I'm just going to jump right in. So why do we talk about migration and tracking in the first place? We have some projects here in Missouri, and I didn't put it on the slide, but in the Midwest and in Central America and South America, actually, to learn more about our migratory birds. Technologies to track birds and other wildlife, honestly, but birds are the coolest, so we're going to cover birds. These technologies are blowing up right now. It's a burgeoning field of study in ornithology. So these tags and tracking systems are amazing. Migration is amazing, and that's always fun to talk about. And we're learning new things each year from these different technologies, and I'll cover that briefly in the talk as well. So why do we track wildlife? At its base level, we track them to learn more about an animal's interaction with their surroundings, or to learn what their territory size is, or home range, meaning what size area, what natural resources are they coming in contact with throughout their day or parts of the year or their whole life. All of that can inform how we manage land and really just learning how the animal interacts with its surroundings. We can learn about that movement at a larger scale around their landscape or their territory. We can learn about breeding demography. Certain birds you put tags on, if the bird doesn't move for weeks and weeks, you can infer that during the breeding season that bird, if it's not dead, is incubating a nest. And so you can learn about its breeding and its activity, the bird's behavior, things like that. And clearly this is at varying scales. You can look at the habitat scale, its territory, that one individual animal's territory, all the way out to a hemispheric scale, tracking migration, which is largely what we'll be talking about today. So I want to cover the big buckets of bird tracking. So we're narrowing down into birds rather than tracking of other wildlife. Clearly you saw on a previous slide that we track all sorts of animals, large mammals, deer, all sorts of animals really have been tracked to learn more about their natural history. So I'll cover each of these with a slide: band recovery, radio telemetry, satellite telemetry, geolocators, and stable isotopes. I don't go into stable isotopes too much, but the point of that is that you collect a feather from the bird and you can learn you can take hydrogen samples from the rachis of the feather to learn where the hydrogen was laid in that feather, learning where the bird was when they grew their feathers. So you can get an idea of where on a large map, a hydrogen map of the hemisphere or of the continent, where the bird was when it grew that feather. So you can tell like where the birds have been, but it's very general information. Band recovery is our oldest way to track birds. It gives us a direct knowledge of point A and point B. Point A being where we put the band on the bird. There's a federal bird banding program. You can only get bird bands through the USGS Bird Banding Lab. And so these metal silver bands right here, they have a unique code on them. And if the bird is ever captured at a later time in its life, you get information on how old the bird is, or how far it's traveled if you capture it on migration or after it's made its trip on migration. But in general, the recapture rates of banded birds are about less than 2%. And so it all just depends on what your research question is, which tracking method is the best. Geolocators are one of the newer technologies and are really, really interesting. They use these small tags. You can see one on this golden winged warbler right here. They periodically record light levels and dark time and record that data on the tag. You use the day length to determine latitude and the dark time used to determine longitude. So it stores that information on the transmitter, but you have to recapture the bird to download all the data off of the tag, which is crazy. A lot of these songbirds, a lot of birds in general, have very high site fidelity, which means they're coming back to the exact same places to breed year after year after year. So you can put up nets and try and capture the same birds that you put the tag on the year before and download that data off of the tag that the bird has been wearing. You can imagine that this provides some sample bias because you're only recapturing the healthiest or hardiest birds or just the luckiest ones that have made it on migration both ways and back to you. And some of the location quality can be kind of fuzzy because around the equator, light and dark time are about equivalent. So it gets a little bit fuzzy on location, but the tags you do get back from these birds are very, very cool. So this is a new and burgeoning field of research, lots of new technologies coming out all the time. Radio telemetry is also one of the oldest ways that we have to track wildlife. And it has a lot of different applications. And that's what Modus is working off of. This new technology I'm going to be talking about, it's working off of radio telemetry. So the concept of this is that you put a tag on a bird. That tag has a digitized code and it's digitized to a set frequency. So this woman using a handheld antenna is walking around looking for, I think, tagged fawns. So she's looking around trying to detect the signal that the tag on the fawn's collar is emitting. Every minute, few seconds, you can program all of that stuff when you order the tag. So it's emitting a signal. She's walking around looking for that ping. So when she hears that signal, she gets closer and closer, and the ping in her headphones gets louder and louder. So you can tell you're getting closer to the animal, and then you can record its location. So how you detect that signal that's coming out of that tag can range a lot. With an antenna, you can detect it wirelessly. It all depends on the size of the tag. You can attach this tag to birds in particular mount it on their tail. You can glue it, you can backpack, put a little backpack harness with elastic, lightweight elastic on the bird underneath around its legs. You can use satellites and receivers, which is what Modus works with. It all depends on a bird's weight. So there's a huge broad range of tags, these transmitters you can put on birds. And you're not allowed to put anything on a bird that's more than 3% of its body weight. So when we're thinking of these very small migratory songbirds that can weigh 9, 10 grams, 3% is not very much. So we need very tiny tags. So it's a balance, no matter what you're tracking, between the weight of the transmitter and the battery life, because the larger the transmitter, the larger the battery, the longer the life of the tag. So there's some really cool research with really large tags, which clearly we can't put on our smallest songbirds. Dr. Mitch Wiegman, who was here at the University of Missouri, he put these large transmitters that had both a GPS unit to get location, but they also had an accelerometer. So it was recording how the bird was moving its head or its neck right here. And so they had algorithms to show, well, not only do we know where the bird is every 30 minutes, we know what it's doing every 6 minutes, because one algorithm showed, well, it's moving this way, so it's flying. It's moving this way, so it's eating. It's moving this way, it's just sitting there. So it's very interesting that not only can you get location from a tag, but behavior. And clearly, again, we can't use this on our smallest birds because of that weight limit. So these are just a few examples of tracking birds in particular. This is from a wild turkey study here in Missouri. These are big, bulky tags, but they last years. And so the bigger the tag, you can get little solar panels on them, so they last a long time. It's all a question of balancing the weight of the tag versus how long it lives and what your uses are. So because we didn't need satellite tags or GPS tags because they're more expensive, we could get more of these tags that you manually track to put out on more birds. So it's all just a balance. This was a greater prairie chicken study when these birds were translocated from farther west back to Missouri. It's part of a restoration effort. They have this little neck collar on, and this has the little transmitter that's emitting the signal that Len is tracking here with his handheld Yagi antenna. Again, there are larger tags you can put on larger birds. So this is a little solar panel on the back of this tag on a red-tailed hawk. And then this is just kind of an anecdotal, cool project that one of my best friends did in grad school. So she was tracking post-fledging dispersal, which means where the young go when they leave the nest. And so she wanted to put tags on red-bellied woodpeckers before they left the nest. Well, that brings up a problem, right? Because they're inside a cavity. So what she did is she would take a huge ladder out to the middle of the woods. And because most of these birds are nesting in cavities and dead trees and snags, you can't lean that ladder up against a dead tree. That's too dangerous. So they would take ropes and they suspended the ladder out tied to 4 trees. And so the ladder was just standing upright, suspended next to the snag. She would climb up it and they would drill a big hole using a drill with a, I don't know what kind of bit it's called, but it's a circle. And you drill a hole underneath the cavity in the tree because the cavity goes down. So they drilled a hole underneath the existing cavity because you couldn't fit your hand in the existing one. They took out the hole, took the babies out, put them in a little sack, lowered them down the ladder to people waiting on the ground. They put these tags on the nestlings, and then they hoisted them back up, put them back in the cavity before they were ready to fledge, and then they used wood glue to glue the hole back into the tree that they stuck their hand in. So then you had to tie it perfectly so that after a few days or a week, these birds fledged, and then Allison could track them around the landscape. So this gave a lot of information on roving behaviors that these birds do, checking out new territories away from their parents' territory, and finally choosing a territory and staying there. So they really didn't have that information about these birds before. So just really fascinating stuff that tracking can lead to. Then we move to these nano tags, which is this new technology that Modus works with. And they are so tiny, they range from 0.2 to 2.9 grams. And so they can place them on the smallest migratory animals, like our largest insects that you see here, like monarchs and large dragonflies. That's how tiny these tags are. So it's just really phenomenal. It's come a long way, and there's a lot of variety in this field. And I know I'm not covering it all, but this is just a smattering of some of the uses for that. So again, advances in technology. We have these incredibly light tags, these batteries that are lasting longer and longer. We all know that. We get a new cell phone every few years and the battery lasts longer and longer. That technology is all just moving very quickly. And these tags are becoming more and more affordable and accessible to more and more researchers. So what is Modus? We're finally there. What does Modus have to do with all of this? So we're going to talk about the Motus Wildlife Tracking System, which is really this new collaborative way that's just very revolutionary. So it's run by Birds Canada, and they set it up, and it works off of 2 things. It works off of these nano tags, again, these radio tags we've talked about, that you place on our smallest songbirds to track over long distances. So the larger the bird, the cooler the tag you can get, right? It can be a GPS tag that can give you instant readings on locations on where the bird is found. But for our smallest migratory animals, like small bats, small songbirds, those insects we talked about, we don't have a transmitter for that. So we have a transmitter that's very tiny. Modus works to track small animals over these long distances. It can also do local tracking as well. But really, what I find fascinating is on these very, very small animals over these very, very long distances that have before now, we've been unable to track this far. So the tag you place on the bird, it emits a pulse every 5 to 30 seconds. You program that when you order the tag. And you digitize it. When you order the tag, you have it digitized to the Modus frequency. And so there's also an array of semi-permanent sensors or receivers. I'm going to call them Modus receivers or Modus stations throughout this talk. They wait for these Modus tagged animals to fly within range of the tower. And so these are passive receivers across the landscape. Stay with me. They all work on the same radio frequency. So in previous, before Modus, I would put out a receiver or carry a receiver on my body looking for my birds with tags for my small project. I'd put out these tags, I'd follow them around, get locations on my birds. Dana would be doing a different tracking project on a different species altogether somewhere else. She would have her bird tags on a different frequency. She'd walk around, get locations, and that would be it. Well, these receivers, you're not carrying them around, you place them on the landscape. So they're listening all the time for that Modus frequency. And all of these yellow dots are active Modus stations in the world. And all of these work on the exact same frequency. So I can be a researcher in Maine and place a tag on a bird. And if it flies within range on migration of any of these yellow dots, the detection is picked up. And that's what's revolutionary about Modus, is it's collaborative. And as a researcher or otherwise, I don't have to place all of these receivers along a bird's entire migratory route. We're all working together by placing these receivers on the same frequency. It's really phenomenal. So when I gave this talk about 2 years ago, there were about 800 receivers across the world. And you can see that now it's pushing 1,300 receivers. So Modus is just blowing up and really, really growing in popularity and use. Clearly, the broader the network is, the more tags you can put out. It all just, the more powerful the network, the more powerful and the more opportunities you have to tag birds, right? Because there's more stations for them to be detected on. So this is my really janky depiction of this. This is our footless Swainson's thrush with a Modus tag. It is not to scale. Just bear with me. This is that bird's outline. Here is our Modus station. You have antennas that go down, that have coax cable attached to them. They go down to a little mini computer that's your receiver. The detection distance is about 15 kilometers if you have perfect line of sight. If you have nothing in the way, no trees, no buildings, anything like that. This is about 15 kilometers each direction. So we have our bird flying along. Oh, guys, it flew within range of the Modus station. So the detection is logged, it's held at the station, or if you have a new cellular tracking technology sensor station, it uploads that detection on the cell network, it sends it right to your Modus desktop computer right there in the icon. But the point is, we set out on the landscape, and if a Modus tag bird's flies within range, it stores that detection at the unit or transmits it to the Modus website. So this is our footless Swainson's thrush again. Say I tagged it up in Maine, as we talked about. Not really Maine. And then it's moving south on migration and flies within range of all of these stations. And then its detection is stored at those stations. And then I, as the researcher who deployed the tag, I can look that up online and I get lots of cool information on migration timing and things like that. All things that'll feed into conservation efforts. So again, Motus Wildlife Tracking System. It works on birds, bats, and large insects. It works off of those nano tags, those very tiny tags, and this automated tower detections of this massive network that's out on the landscape. And they use the same frequency across that tower array. I hope you're still with me. There's a lot more to talk about. Also, all data is open source. I can go to the Modus website today. You can look at the receiver locations map. You click on any of the yellow dots on these screenshots I've shown you, and you can go to a table and see all the birds that have been detected at that station. It's very open and great for education. Modus also has education curricula and things like that on their website, so it's great. They have it all. They have all things there for you waiting to tell more people about it and educate on migration. Now, Modus is adapting, and they've partnered with Cellular Tracking Technologies, or CTT. CTT provides a sensor station, which now listens on 2 different frequencies. So trying to make it as useful as possible, it's adapting with these technologies. So now these new stations we're putting out, they're still Modus stations. They're listening on 2 frequencies that can detect 2 different types of tags, and the detections are transmitted on the cell network. So before, researchers or grad students or whoever put these out would have to travel all the way out potentially into the field. There's a lot of them in Canada and very remote parts of the country. And you have to travel really far to download the data off of the unit in person. You have to take out an SD card and download the data of what detections you've gotten. Well, now using CTT and sensor stations, it transmits all the information on the cell network. So it's very convenient, and we're adapting with these new technologies. So how do you place these stations? They're not all towers. Here in Missouri, our MDC, our conservation department stations we put up are on MDC communications towers, but you don't have to place it on a tower. These receivers and these antennas that you see in this next picture have been attached to a wide array of locations. You have them very remote, again in Canada, on a pop-up mast, that's what this is called, which is run by a solar panel down here with deep cell batteries in this case right here. So it just stands on its own, and it's run off of solar. You can attach them to a house or a building or on top of a fire tower. Lots of different options. So how does this contribute to conservation? Let's get into the conservation side of things, of what this is contributing. So we can learn about migration timing. We can learn about stopover sites, where our migratory birds are stopping along their migratory route. All of that is very important to target conservation efforts where they're stopping, or where many species are stopping. We can find these hot spots where we can target conservation efforts and get the biggest bang for our buck conservation-wise, and help the most species possible. So this is just one case. Researchers with Selva, which is one of our partners down in Colombia, the country, they have tagged 133 gray-cheeked thrushes. They tagged them in the Santa Marta Mountains. And they found some very interesting information. These are tracks of the birds that they released. This is in the Santa Marta Mountains right here. They released the birds, and then they got pings on Modus stations up here in the US and Canada. And to show them how fast they were taking, how long they stayed in the Santa Marta Mountains to fatten up before they migrated. All of that stuff is new information that we really just haven't known before. So birds tended to stay in the Santa Marta Mountains about 2 weeks to fatten up before migration. Birds who didn't took up to 30 days longer to migrate. And that's a big deal. One individual made a 2,000-mile trip in the span of a long weekend. These tiny, tiny birds over these long distances. Migration never ceases to amaze me, and there's always going to be new cool things to learn using tracking technologies like this. These are the Santa Marta Mountains. I am super jealous of people who get to deploy tags in that field site. And then they found other cool things from this study. They showed the birds that were fattest before they left, checking, body condition when they put the most tags on them. They checked how fat they were. The fatter the bird, the farther they could fly, which makes a lot of sense. And that's what a lot of these migrants are doing right before they hop the Gulf or go over the Caribbean. They're fattening up to get as fat as possible so they can make the longest distance flight they can at one time without running out of energy. So I'm just going to go through about 5 or 6 slides really fast. I'm not giving them enough time at all, and I apologize, but of some projects that are specifically out of the Midwest looking at Modus. And so Nathan Cooper and Pete Mara at Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center looked at movements of Kirtland's warblers. So they were doing within breeding season local movements where the birds were moving around in addition to migratory movements when they arrived. So they put up 12 local towers to track Kirtland's warblers. They winter in the Bahamas. And they found really cool stuff about these long distance movements that these birds were making during the breeding season, like 5 to 77 kilometers, just moving all over the place. Really cool stuff that we just did not know before. So you can do local tracking as well as the long distance tracking. There are folks putting Modus tags on black terns and on black tern chicks. They're the cutest little puffballs ever. You can see right here. And they're tagging chicks pre-fledged to provide, again, a more accurate measurement of fledging success and survival and their habitat use after they fledge, kind of like the story I was talking about Allison Cox, the woodpeckers. Rusty blackbird stopover. Rusty blackbirds are declining very precipitously, so they're trying to learn more about how these birds are interacting with their environments around the Great Lakes. So they just have been learning a lot about these movements they'll make across the lakes even. during stopover, during migration. Very interesting stuff. So these are a few projects out of Ohio State University with Dr. Chris Tonra and his lab. They also looked at black-crowned night heron post-fledging and juvenile survival. So again, they do local tracking in addition to the long distance movements. And then they've put tags on Virginia rails to look at their movements before they breed and during migration. It's just very cool stuff. There's just a broad suite of projects that people are using Modus for. This is one of my favorite ones. So this is another student of Chris Tonra's, Jay Wright. He put tags on blue jays to look at overwinter survival, but also look at seed dispersal and how far they were taking acorns and different nuts. They put Modus tags inside the acorns, which I think is just the coolest thing ever, because then they would track the acorns to see how far the birds had taken them for seed dispersal, which is just thinking outside the box for Modus, but it's very cool. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about migration, and I want to touch base on why we should care about full life cycle bird conservation. So in the world of birds, 1,800 of the 10,000 are long distance migrants. That means they're moving out of the country, or some birds are short and medium distance migrants. They either move around short distance or they move like a state or two. But then the long distance ones are these like up to 1,000-mile long distance migrations. In North America, 650 birds nest in North America. In Missouri, we have about 335 species, give or take, annually present in the state, not counting rarities and things like that. About 170 of them breed in Missouri. 84 of them leave Missouri in the non-breeding season completely. And about a third of our breeding birds that breed here in Missouri leave the US completely in the non-breeding season. So we really can't ignore the threats that these birds are facing and ignore conservation efforts when they're outside the US. We have to pay attention to where they are, where they're going, and how we can help conservation-wise. So this is a very cool map that was created by Partners in Flight. They're working to update these. And this overlaid the winter ranges of 42 priority bird species that are migratory. And so they overlaid all those winter territories to show which areas we should focus on in Missouri for our Missouri birds, right? The birds that breed in Missouri, this is where we would target overwinter and stopover sites if we contributed to that, which we do through the Southern Wings program. So they made these for all the states and Canadian provinces, which is very cool because it shows all the states where they should focus to get the more bang for their buck. So just to touch base, this is not an extensive talk on full life cycle conservation, but one of the threats is deforestation down on the wintering grounds. You can see in the background, this is palm to make palm oil. And you can see there's just a little chunk of this tropical forest that's removed to make this monoculture, which doesn't provide anything for these migratory birds that are smashed in this habitat. So just imagine, I'm going back a slide, just imagine all the birds across that are migratory across all of Canada nesting, across all the US, and they're all spread out on breeding territories during the breeding season. Now, as fall comes, they don't care about breeding territories anymore because they're done breeding. So they all smash up and they migrate down to this red patch right here. And just think, all those birds that are breeding, all those birds that are migratory and nesting across that broad habitat, those broad ranges are smashed into that tiny, tiny strip from Mexico through Central America to South America and the Caribbean. So imagine how important that tropical forest is, where all those birds are crammed in, feeding for up to 7-8 months of the year. So we have to pay attention and help what's going on down on the wintering grounds. And so a few other threats are deforestation can be driven by ag or grazing or just development because there's a lot of people. Pair that with very low GDPs per capita, and folks conservation is a luxury. They just can't afford to, not cut down forests and do the right thing. I mean, it's hard. It's a big challenge. You can't just ask people to do the right thing when they're trying to feed their families. And so our help is very needed to help fund projects and conservation work down there. And our money goes so much farther down there. So these are just a few slides from American Bird Conservancy, who are a leader in this full life cycle conservation. We work with them in Southern Wings, which this isn't a talk about Southern Wings, but I encourage you to look up the Southern Wings program through AFWA. It's very cool. It helps state agencies support migratory bird conservation efforts on stopover sites in the wintering grounds. So this is just an example of African palm increasing from 1993 to 2010, and the green shows how much of it is exported. And so clearly the push for that is outside of their countries. because we use palm oil in many different things. But it just shows that there's another threat of all of these things expanding. So these little chunks of tropical forests are being removed for, ag commodities and things like that. And so this in Spanish says migratory species need functional landscapes, not just reserves, not just what we think of as like protected lands that no one can touch. We also, because so much of it is in private land, just like in Missouri, we need to work with private landowners to help integrate conservation into these production systems, which is what it says down here. So it's not always these big swaths of tropical forest, it's these little patches taken out, little piecemeal. So Modus, if we track birds moving through these areas, it helps us target work to promote and support sustainable working lands like ag and ranching and conservation where they're needed the most, where we find where these birds are using the most, these hot spots, stopover sites, and then we can target work there. So I actually first heard about Modus from George and Lily Chavarria de Rio. They are in Nicaragua, and they're conservation partners. And they said, we want a Modus station. This was at a meeting, a Partners in Flight meeting. They said, we want a Modus station on our reserve. And I said, what's a Modus station? So that was in 2017. And since then, there's been a lot of Modus since then. But they put up a tower, a really hefty tower, on their coffee farm and their eco lodge. And then we placed the antennas and helped fund that through the Conservation Heritage Foundation here in Missouri. That's them placing the antennas. So also, because I showed so much gusto for Modus, the Midwest Migration Network is a cool group of state and federal agencies and NGOs across the Midwest. And they have a telemetry initiative. So they asked me to head up the telemetry initiative, which their point is to broaden Modus across Region 3 in the Midwest. So not only should we broaden Modus across Region 3, but we all feel very strongly that we need to increase it in the neotropics as well, since that's where we're trying to track birds and where they're going and returning from. So not only do we need more stations up here, we need them down there as well. So this is our Midwest Migration Network strategic Modus plan. The orange dots are the pie in the sky. If we had our way, this is kind of the strategic layout that we would like in these latitudinal arrays, east-west, because in our neck of the woods, birds are generally migrating north-south, so we want to make lines. We want, ideally, the detection diameters of each station to be overlapping, so any Modus tagged bird or bat or whatever that flies through the state is detected by a Modus station. So this is our pie in the sky. The yellow dots, again, are the active stations that are up right now and going. So Pennsylvania has a really cool approach. They have a ton more receivers than this now. This was a screenshot I took from about 2018, but they got a really big chunk of money to place this kind of digital fence across their state. And I saw that and I said, I want to do it. So that's what we're trying to do in Missouri, except we're going to put up 2. And the reasoning behind trying to put up 2 of these digital fences is because the northern half of the state, as we all know, is glaciated plains. It's very flat, rolling hills and grassland. And then down in the southern half of the state, we have our Ozark forest. And so I wanted an array in both of those habitat types to increase the use and diversity of different bird species that we could pick up. So since 2018, we've grown to having 17 active Modus stations in Missouri. We have about 7 in the north in that latitudinal array. We have 8 down south. We have 1 in Jeff City that we put up as a pilot so I could learn how the heck it worked before we moved on to more. The St. Louis Zoo has placed 1. We have a new one at Riverlands Audubon Center. And then in the next calendar year, we have these planned to be placed as well. So really trying to fill out those 2 latitudinal lines. We're having more going up by partners. The light blue are partners that are going to place or have funded these stations. The orange ones are ones that will be placed by the Conservation Department and through different grants. You can see that we're expanding from our 2 latitudinal arrays to next along our major rivers. And so, yeah, it's just chugging right along, and there's 13 more on the way. So we've gotten a few federal grants, and donations have been very key to this effort. So the very first grant we got was Fish and Wildlife Service Region 3 Migratory Birds Grant. That gave us money to place 12 stations, 6 in Missouri, 4 in Illinois, trying to do my math, and 2 in Guatemala. So that was exciting. And then we went for the big bucks, and I gathered together about 10 different partners and 4 different state agencies, the Conservation Department, and then about 5 NGO partners across the Midwest, across all the states, to place about 60 stations and to support 3 Modus tracking research projects. So this was very exciting. So we are placing, or partners already have placed, about 57 stations across 8 Midwestern states and 14 in the Neotropics. Some in Mexico and the Yucatan and Costa Rica and Colombia with partners. So that's very exciting. We're in the midst of that now. Private donations. We've raised $31,000 in Missouri alone from Audubon chapters, from Missouri Birding Society, from folks donating volunteer time at Boeing through a match program. Just amazing people. And then just private donors, amazing people who are just giving little bits of money to Modus, because we have a Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation account just for Modus. So anybody is able to contribute. And I think that's kind of rare, where lay people can just contribute directly to research. And so this is one opportunity, one way we can do that. So thank you to those partners and donors. So the Midwest Modus growth through through our grants, we placed 16 in Missouri. Those numbers are outdated. The ones I just showed are accurate. But Iowa's putting some up as part of this big competitive state wildlife grant we got. DNR, or Iowa's putting in 5, Indiana's putting in 8, Ohio 7, all of these, you see them just so it's really growing our Modus coverage across the Midwest and the Neotropics. So in 2018, I think it was 2018, I did a state tour where I tried to go to many different Audubon chapters to give a lot of this very presentation, to talk about Modus and its progress and how things are going, and try and get support for it. And so back then I used to show this map, because in 2018, this was the coverage. The Midwest was a complete black hole for Modus coverage. And so we had a lot of work to do. And so I used to say this: you may notice a gap in the middle of the country. Well, look at this progress. This is 2019, and we're gaining some steam. But this is 2021. Things have just gone crazy in the last few years. Modus is just blowing up. And this is not me. This is not just our grants or anything like that. Many partners, many partners are recognizing the value of Modus and what we can learn, and how we can track our migratory birds and really make a difference. And they saw this black hole, and they are really helping to fill this. You can see a lot of growth out west as well. There's new groups like Bird Conservancy of the Rockies throwing into Modus and using coordinators to coordinate all these partners. There are a lot more going up in Mexico soon as part of this effort in the Great Plains to track their grassland birds moving through overwintering and things like that. So it's really it's very exciting time for Modus, and it's growing very quickly. Also, as I mentioned, we need to put more stations down in the Neotropics where our birds are traveling to, so that we have stations down there for them to be detected on as well. So you can see the existing stations right now. And again, this map is outdated. There are more in Costa Rica now, and there's a few more throughout here. But I used an older screenshot. But through our Modus grants that we've gotten here in Missouri and through Midwest partners, we've thrown in those Neotropic stations, and we will have added 15 new stations in the Neotropics as part of Midwestern Modus grants. So very proud of that, to help support those partners. They need it so much. They need that extra support. They have the NGOs, they have the bird conservation folks, helping them out wherever we can to get them the supplies they need is very important. So this just shows where, in general, we place some of those from our grants we've gotten. So this is stuff from the Missouri and Midwest Modus Report. So we just hired to help me Amanda Heltzel. She's amazing. Hi, Amanda. I know you're here. And she put together this Modus Report, which just brings together all the great information of birds that have been detected on our 16 or 17 Modus stations in the state. And so it shows it coordinates it by what detections were on what station and what species and things like that. So big thanks to Amanda. So since 2018, she has pulled together that we've had 101 detections on our Modus stations. That's just in the last 3 years. And that's only really during migration. So 4 months of the year, 4 or 5 months of the year, in just 3 years, we've gotten all these detections. It covers 16 species of bird and 1 bat. You can see some of the species here and the number of detections in the middle column, how many of each of those species we've gotten. Here's that continued. Just a really broad array of these migrants. There's always Swainson's thrushes. Swainson's thrushes are tagged a lot because of their size. They can hold a Modus tag that lasts a very long time. So we always get some Swainson's thrush detections. In fall of 2019, we got 15 of our 19 detections that fall were from Montana. They were from Swainson's thrushes, common nighthawks, and gray catbirds that were tagged in Montana, who just went up over the Rockies and down through the Midwest to migrate. It's just, I did not see that coming. This is another cool graphic that Amanda made that shows where the birds that were detected in Missouri were originally tagged, because all that information is on the Modus website as well. So she can see, this is where all these birds that have flown through Missouri were originally tagged. I just think that that's so amazing. And she had to split up the map because they're in, North America and South America. So this is really, really cool stuff. This is another cool graphic she made of the larger the circle, the more detections have been recorded on our Modus stations. So Hunter has the most with about 21, and then it goes down from there. But it's really interesting, even up in our grassland part of the world and down in our Ozark forest, it varies, but it's just really interesting stuff. So that report's coming out soon. I will send it broadly to many partners, probably most of you that I sent the invitation to this webinar to. So again, Modus really drives this research. We're hoping to place these permanent lines to provide that infrastructure. Clearly, the stronger the Modus network is, the stronger we can be and the more we can learn with deploying tags and what we can learn about birds. So if a broader network exists, clearly more projects will occur, more tagging projects will occur. It'll give us more data on Missouri's birds, and I say that in quotes because these migratory birds really tie us together with partners in different parts of the US, Mexico, Central America, and South America, the Caribbean. There are shared birds. They migrate across all of these boundaries. They clearly don't care about boundaries, and so we really have to work across the hemisphere to learn more about them and really, really foster these partnerships to help assist partners down where our birds are spending more than half the year. Like, they're not our birds because they're only coming here to breed. They're only here 3 or 4 months of the year. So we really need to pay attention and really invest in conservation efforts where these birds are spending time more than half the year. It really contributes to the greater good. So we've invested in the Modus network. Clearly, we're helping to promote that, but we're also delving into tagging projects. I felt that we needed a strong infrastructure of Modus stations before we put tags out on birds so that we could, get closer to guaranteeing that our birds we put tags on would be detected somewhere. So we're getting to that point where you can see our 2 lines, you can see the progress is being made, and now we're moving into some tagging efforts through that grant we just got. So the cost is also not incredibly limiting. So a station ranges from $4,000, and you can get it below $4,000 depending on where you're placing the station. It's about $4,000 to $5,000 per station, so it's really not a lot. Really, you're buying the antennas, the coax cable, the fittings you need to attach it to whatever you're attaching it to, and then the receiver station that you purchase, whether you get a sensor station or a Modus station from elsewhere. So it's really pretty affordable. And if you cut corners like folks in Selva down in Colombia, they used a bamboo pole to put up their antennas, so you can save a lot of money in a lot of different ways and get creative where you need to be. So again, the Heritage Foundation has an account just for Modus. You can find that on their website. So it's a Missouri Wildlife Tracking Modus Towers account. And there's also migratory bird habitat conservation programs. And so there's just lots of potential with the Modus network. You're part of hemispheric research, you're adding to the greater knowledge base. Clearly, it attracts research both to Missouri and across the hemisphere, across birds ranges, migratory ranges. And it really informs management, ultimately, on where we want to focus efforts in conservation, where our birds are going the most and spending the most time, so we can help them throughout their full life cycle. So thank you, everybody. That went faster than I thought, but I think maybe it'll hit right in an hour. So I'm happy to take your questions. And again, thanks for spending time with us. And I will hand it back over to Dana.
Sarah, we have quite a few questions coming in. I've been trying to curate them a little bit because there's some similar questions, a couple of things you've already addressed. I do want to mention that at the end there, Sarah talked about the MCHF giving opportunity. I put a link directly to the Modus project in the chat for giving to MCHF. And so let's see. You did talk about the cost a little bit, but we had a few different questions about sort of what the maintenance necessities are and the life of the station. So if you can talk just briefly a little bit about like the actual physical logistics of the station.
Yeah, so there's a few maintenance costs, but not many. I mean, if you place it out in the open, which you want to anyway, away from trees, you want to be above tree line. That's the hard part. There are a lot of people who are very interested in putting up a Modus station, but it's not always feasible where you are. You need a mast or a big metal pole to attach, brace up against something. You need it to be tall enough, pardon me, to get all of your antennas up above trees or other things that are in the way, buildings. If you have a building that you're pointing an antenna at, it's not going to work because it's just going to, the signal that it's just going to run into the building. So you need clear lines of sight for the directions you're pointing your antennas. So it needs to be up high on the landscape, and you need power. You need either solar panels and deep cell batteries if you're in the middle of nowhere, or you need a place you can plug in if it's on a building. If you can get an internet connection and plug it into the unit, you don't need to pay for the cell data transfer charges to transmit the Modus data. The data charges that are monthly from CTT, you're paying for that convenience to not have to travel out to your stations and download all the data because it's being transmitted on the cell network. That can be a nominal fee. It depends on if your station is loud or detecting other noises, or if it's just detecting the tags of the birds that are flying by. But that's a pretty minimal cost. But otherwise, unless something falls on your antennas, you really don't have any maintenance costs of the physical structure. These receivers are sent to you if you purchase it in a weatherproof box. You can have them out in the elements. They're made that way. And so it doesn't need to be in a building, but clearly you get convenience if you place it on a building because you can potentially have an internet connection and power. So it kind of varies, and that is the very challenging part about Modus is every single station is different. Every single location is different. You will have different challenges. It is a learning curve for a lot of us that are biologists or people who are just interested in the outdoors. You're trying to learn cell and radio communications, which I do not have training in, but I lean very heavily on one of our MDC staff, Joe Davis. He's incredible. He's saved me pretty much. Helping me with that part of things. So it has its challenges, but you need to be flexible and you can figure it out. You can put Modus anywhere. It's just, you got to be able to roll with the punches, I think. Different challenges in different places.
Here's a related question from Wisconsin, and I definitely have the impression that there's a lot of researchers on this particular webinar that are interested in deploying this technology themselves, which is really cool. So Eric says, the detection maximum was indicated as being 15K in open conditions. What would be the approximate minimum range? For instance, if a new station is being placed at a Great Lakes location, it could detect up to 15 kilometers over open water. However, what might be the inland range if the shoreline / adjacent inland lands are heavily forested? Just an approximate guess.
Probably up to the tree line that the signal would be running into. Like if you're pointing your antenna at trees, it'll stop at the trees. It might go a little bit into the trees depending on what trees they are and how thick they are and what time of year. It may see through the trees a little bit if they're deciduous. But yeah, probably won't go too much farther past that. And you would also want to do some research on the Modus site about Modus detections over water. I think that there's something about that where it either decreases the detectability a little or maybe, I would do more research about putting Modus stations over water. But if anyone has questions about this stuff, just email me and we know who to put you in contact with. We have a really broad network of people who've placed these things everywhere. They've placed them along the Great Lakes, and so we can get you answers if you have questions. So shoot me an email. I'm happy to help you.
Sarah, we have a few different questions about the tags themselves. There's, and rightly, just some concern about how the tags affect the birds. And relatedly, how was the maximum of 3% body mass determined? And then also sort of logistic questions about the tags, such as the cost of the tags themselves.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of studies over the years, for however long radio tags have been around, to look at the behavior and effects of those on birds. And they wouldn't still be allowed. Anytime you put a radio tag on a bird, you have to apply for a permit to put any auxiliary marker on a bird. which means anything besides a bird band. Even for a bird band, you have to apply for those bands. The only place you can get them is through the USGS Bird Banding Lab. And they're also the ones who give you the permit to put anything on a bird. So you really have to justify placing this on a bird. Anytime we place anything on a bird, it provides some risk, some minimal risk, it could, but there's a lot of research that has shown that birds' behavior continues to be the same, even with this device on them. And the Bird Banding Lab and other folks do not take those things lightly. They look at each situation and assess every single permit and application to determine whether the research is worth it. You have to be learning something and contributing to the larger research of a species to place a tag on that bird. So that has to be justified and balanced. And so each situation is determined by federal folks who regulate those things to determine if it's worth it to even track the species in each research project. Oh, how do you know 3%? Well, there's a lot of research on birds about how much they weigh. And so depending on your species of interest and what tags you want to deploy, you can look up how much they weigh, and you'll know that you can't exceed a certain weight. And then you can go, when you're buying your tags, you make sure that the weight of the tag is less than that 3%.
Sarah, we have a couple questions from Iowa. The questions themselves aren't super related, but I thought it was kind of cool and interesting that we have a couple folks from Iowa. Joel says, we had considered helping put up a Modus station at an IBA, an important bird area, but it's not anywhere near the horizontal line through Iowa. Is that pointless? And then the other question from Iowa is that there's a tower near Iowa City that is listed as being terminated, quote unquote. Is it just not activated yet, or can they be turned on and off?
Okay, so the first one is, it's not in the line. Is that okay? At this point, with us trying to broaden the network across the Midwest, put Modus where you can put Modus. We need more stations everywhere. It's just, if people ask us and they're looking for guidance on a grant for multiple stations, yes, we encourage people to put them in a latitudinal array. Over time, you need some sort of strategic plan for that, right? To give people guidance as they're moving down the road. But no, if you can place a station where you are, any new station is great, because you never know what birds are going to pass through. And if you're just hosting a station and not deploying tags right then, you're still contributing to the network. It's awesome. I'd encourage anybody to put up a station wherever they are if they can maintain it. And if you have a high open area that doesn't have any barriers to that signal. The cost of the tags, it depends on the size of them. They're about $150 to $250 a piece.
Sarah, you have a comment in the chat that you might want to, or we can copy and paste it, or we can get the text chat. But relatedly, there's a question in the Q&A. Do you see any potential for community involvement in Modus-related projects? I know you said that there's education material, but anything further to increase community buy-in / participation in migratory bird conservation? Great.
Yeah, it all starts with communication. There are quite a few stations, and I don't know the stats on exactly how many, but there are stations that are placed in municipalities, especially in rural areas, because those are the high points on the landscape oftentimes, is buildings downtown or buildings on the landscape that rise above, the rest of the landscape. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to talk to many people about Modus. It's not hard to convince folks. When I was first getting into Modus, the largest network of communications towers in the state is run by the Missouri State Highway Patrol. And, that may be we work with them on other things with the conservation department, but it may seem an unlikely partner for Modus. Well, I just set up a meeting and went to go talk to the captain and a few guys who run their communications towers and talked about what Modus does in migratory birds. And the guy happened to be a birder, because he has bird feeders up in his backyard. And it's not hard to convince people of the beauty of migration and how much we can learn, because it's just such a magical phenomena that these birds fly so far, and that we can learn more and more and more about that. So I think we just need more advocates. We need more people who are talking about Modus, present on it, show the value of it, talk about the cost. But yeah, I think municipalities are a great idea. I know that long term, Modus is interested in making kits that you can put a Modus station on your house, and I know that Cellular Tracking Technologies has certain little receivers you can put in your backyard that records, that can pick up their tags. and other things like that. So it's a broad field of study that's really trying to keep up with the technology and make it as accessible as possible. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to tie into Modus and learn and teach kids and all sorts of things about migration and tagging.
And in the midst of that, you did answer another question, someone asking about sort of a small scale receiver to be able to use on more of like a personal backyard basis.
Yeah, you can do that.
Tom and Dan are both kind of asking about other species other than some of the ones that have been covered already. Tom is asking about our grassland birds. And Dan asked about if you're aware how extensively this is being used for monarch butterflies.
I'm not aware deeply of efforts with either. I know that they're working on Modus tagging a lot of grassland birds out west. And the reason for that is the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies is they have a Great Plains Chihuahuan Desert initiative where they're trying to place Modus stations in the Great Plains, and most of those grassland birds migrate to the Chihuahuan Desert in Mexico. So they're trying to place stations in both places and along the way and tag those grassland birds, which we know are a guild that's just plummeting. We're trying to learn more about where their survival pinch points are and where they may not be surviving and how to help that. And so they're trying to place stations here and there, both where the birds are migrating to and from and through. And they're doing a lot of tagging out west. Here in Missouri and in the Midwest, I know less about grassland birds that are being tagged, but I know that Amber Roth, who's at the University of Maine, she does tagging efforts here in the Midwest, even though she's at the University of Maine, and she's putting tags on bobolinks and things like that. So I know that there are grassland bird efforts, but there's so many research projects going on with Modus. It's hard for me to know all of them. And I know less about the monarch tracking. I think that it occurred mostly in Ontario because that's where that network of Modus stations are. It like creates a net over the top of Ontario. There's so many Modus stations because it originated in Canada around that area. And so I know that more of the localized movements of, I think, dragonflies and the insects that I talked about have been up there where there are just more and more stations. So the more stations we get up, the more options we have like this. The more stations we have up, the more local tracking we can do because it's kind of more guaranteed for tagged birds, bats, and insects to be detected. So you can probably also Google Modus tagging monarchs and Modus tagging dragonflies, and it'll bring up the research. And so much of that stuff is online now too. So I would do some research.
Sarah, I know you can see the chat too. You've got a lot of stuff coming in. We missed the question about a particular tower in Iowa marked as terminated. Is that like online yet? Done being online?
I don't know. If you tell me what station it is, I can ask the person. I don't think you can see, if you're not logged into the site, who's in charge, but you might want to look and see what the project name is on that station and who runs the station, and you may be able to Google it and reach out to them and ask. But I don't know. I don't know about all the stations. I know that I have a contact in Iowa with Iowa DNR, Anna Buckard Thomas, and she is placing Modus stations in Iowa as part of one of our grants, and she may know, but I'm not sure of the ones that show terminated or not. But thanks, Kara, for posting the Grasslands Roadmap information about the Great Plains grassland work. It's wonderful.
Sarah, I want to circle back to Jack Hambine had a question quite a bit ago regarding. So recently released in the Ozarks would be brown-headed nuthatches. What technology did you use and what have you learned?
Yeah, we used radio transmitters like these, but they weren't Modus tags. So Modus, again, for a lot of these birds, is best over these long distances, but Modus can also be used in CTT sensor stations, and they have things called nodes you place on the landscape or look to do local tracking. But we didn't use those because at this point with the nodes with CTT, the tags aren't small enough to put on brown-headed nuthatches. They're 10 grams. So we had to find a tag that was, less than 3% of that weight, which is very tiny. So we just used normal radio tracking tags and put those on half the birds. And we just followed them around and looked with handheld Yagi antennas. So we didn't use Modus because we were doing a lot of local tracking with trees in the way. So walking around the trees made more sense rather than placing a receiver because its signal would run into all those trees. So
we have a couple of probably quick to answer questions in the Q&A. How many active tags versus year by species? So like how much deployment are we talking about? That's got to be pretty hard to know, right?
Yeah, I don't know that statistic off the top of my head. And it would be a lot of tracking down by clicking on each station, or you can also search by project on the Modus website. You can say explore, I think it's explore data, and you can look at a list of all the Modus projects, and there's hundreds. And if you like, you can search by keyword to like look up monarch, and maybe it'll show you the monarch tracking projects and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. That's a big compilation of data question that I don't know offhand. I apologize.
I'm just going to put the modus.org.
Yeah, please do.
Chat. And we did have a question way farther up in the chat. And I always wondered this when we started talking about these things. What does Modus stand for?
It means movement in Latin.
It is not an acronym, which I always thought.
Not an acronym, no, it means movement in Latin. You're going to have to ask Stu McKenzie about the background of that. He runs Modus for Birds Canada.
How long do these tags stay on the birds?
So that varies. So it depends on the harness that you make or the attachment type. Like if you're gluing the tag onto a tail feather, it can fall off when the bird molts. If you're attaching it with a backpack harness, all of that varies by the material you choose to use for the harness part. You can use like jewelry elastic, but you choose stuff that's very thin so that it will eventually fall off. So it varies widely, and I don't know offhand in the literature how long, if they've studied a lot of that, but yeah, it's common knowledge that it will fall off eventually off the bird and not stay on forever. So, but I don't know if there's a lot of data about exactly how long each type stays on.
Sarah, another question from an Iowan here. Jerry Toll asks, is there an annual fee for running a Modus tower?
It kind of varies by project, but if you're hosting a station and deploying tags, there is an annual fee, but it's nominal and on like, a research project scale of nominal. It's, I don't know what it is right now, but yeah, if you're deploying a certain number of tags at the same time, if you're just hosting a station, no, I don't believe that there's a cost to Modus. I don't think that has changed. I'm deploying a lot, and so I don't have a cost, but I don't think if you just host one or two or something like that. If it is, it's just so minimal, but no, I don't believe there's a fee just for hosting a station since you're contributing to the network.
A couple more questions that were further up in the chat related to hosting a station. The internet connection versus downloading. Like, can you speak briefly on what happens if you don't have an internet connection, or what happens if you do have one?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of receiver you have. So if you have a sensor gnome, which was the very first type of Modus receiver, really what we're talking about is, here, I'm going to share my screen again and show this picture. So can you see my screen, Dana?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the Modus receiver. We talk a lot about receiver. It's just a mini computer. This is the mini computer in here. And now, since we moved to CTT sensor stations, you saw it on a previous slide. There was a big picture of a motherboard. Really, it's just a motherboard inside a weatherproof case like this one. So these are the hookups for the coax cable that come down from your antenna. They hook right into here. They go to the radios, which are these little silver things, if you can see those on the screen. Then they hook into your computer right here. So if you have a sensor gnome and you have an internet connection, it goes right to the Modus website when you get a detection. If you have a sensor gnome like this and you don't have an internet connection, it stores the data in this mini computer. And then you visit the station after each migration or whatever. You take out a tiny SD card, you put it into your laptop, you download all the data, put the card back in the station, and you're done. You go away, and then you upload that data on the Modus website. Now, if you have a CTT sensor station, the new one that listens on 2 frequencies, it works off the cell network, so you never have to visit the station. It's uploading the detections multiple times a day. Whatever detections you get from Modus tags, it's going right to the website for researchers to find about their tags.
When you receive the tags, are they live? i.e., how long do you have to get them on a bird?
So most of these tags, I don't know about all of them. Most of them have a magnet taped to the tag, and that keeps it deactivated. I cannot explain to you why. This is clearly radio communications are not my background. I'm sure somebody on this could explain that. But there's a magnet taped to each tag. So yes, it's not activated until you take the magnet off. Then you have to test it to make sure that the tag works. And then it's live. You normally have a receiver right next to you to test that it's detecting the beeps every few seconds or however long you had it digitized. And then you attach it to the bird and let it go.
So I've been saving a question from Samantha. And folks, I do want to say too that if there's more questions that we did not see in the chat, because there's a bit of an inundation there, if you could throw them in the Q&A for us, or I guess repeat them in the chat. But Samantha asked if you want to get involved with, and I have to find it, but I'm pretty sure she was talking about, like, oh, there we go. If someone wants to start a project for adding Modus tags, what is the best way to start? So for banders, for banding operations, how would they get involved?
I think for banding operations, you want to talk to local universities and state agencies that are doing conservation, because when some folks hear about Modus, they think that's really cool. I want to put tags out. I want to see where these birds are going. I want to see where they're detected. I want to learn more about where the bird is going. But we really need to have research questions behind all of this tagging. And so I would give it a lot of thought, talk to local partners. If you have a species of interest, that there are gaps in the scientific literature, do that research. Look at what species we know very little about, that we don't know their stopover sites, we don't know their migration timing, if there are species in decline. Do all that research beforehand. Look at their range, honestly, their breeding range, their migratory range, and reach out to other conservation partners. If you're a bander, talk to other banders, like the Interior Bird Banding Association. Talk to state agencies, not just in your state, but others, and say, hey, have you heard about Modus? Are you interested in a tagging effort? Can we all throw in? Because my next goal as the Midwest Migration Network Telemetry Initiative Chair is, yes, it was to broaden Modus, and it still is. And we got that big grant through the help of this broad network with the Midwest Migration Network. We pull all those partners together across the Midwest. But really, that's to build the infrastructure. Next, we want to do tagging. So we need to think about, like, what species are declining? What species do we want to know more about? And then don't just tag a few at your banding station, or me tag some in Missouri alone. I want to talk to other states across the Midwest so that we're putting multiple tags out across this bird's range, so we can learn what the migratory connectivity is, which is a whole nother talk about different small populations of the same species sometimes migrate to the same location, sometimes they migrate to different locations, and that's informative as well. There's just so much to learn with these birds. And so reach out to researchers around you. That includes state agencies, NGOs, universities. Bring all those people together on a Zoom call. I mean, it's so easy now with Zoom. And just have this conversation and talk with them. There are a lot of people who are thinking about Modus and thinking about banding and things like that. So use your networks. It's all about partnerships. Modus is not to be done in a vacuum. Modus is about partnerships. That's what it's built on. It's collaborative. It's a collaborative network. We're all helping each other. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of both full life cycle conservation. It's the beauty of migration. It's the beauty of Modus. Is we're all working across large ranges here. And that can often help, because people may have little bits of money or amounts, a few tags they can buy here or there. And so I would make it a concerted effort with solid research questions, trying to contribute, and then also publish those data. Maybe find someone who can analyze those and take charge of that tagging effort so that it contributes to scientific literature, and we can build upon that.
So it sounds like Samantha was specifically thinking of.
I saw that.
Oh, it else.
Sounds like you could play a role in that, Dana.
I was going to joke. No one else is thinking about that. Yeah, we've been talking about that a bit. I think it's a great idea. We should have a MRBO World Bird Sanctuary get together on that topic.
Yeah.
Sarah, let's see. Oh, we do have questions. I do. Before I open the Q&A again, you mentioned some things about, of course, conservation of birds on their wintering grounds during their migration, and of course here in the state of Missouri. Is there any of the aspects that you touched on that folks could potentially contribute individually in an impactful way to these birds' conservation? And I know that's a huge topic. I'm not saying, like that's that's hours and hours in and of itself, but like some top things that you might say that that could help people contribute to the conservation of our shared birds?
Yes, what a great question. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that we can do to help. Go to 3billionbirds.org. It's the number 3billionbirds.org. And so this talks about the bird declines. We've lost 29% of our North American birds in the last 50 years. That's crazy. And we should all be thinking of something we can do tomorrow to start to help birds, because they're just really plummeting and certain guilds of species are just really, really hurting. So we should all think of things we can do. There are simple things at scale that we can do to change. So Christmas is coming up. Holidays are coming up, not just Christmas. Look up bird-friendly coffee. So the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center provides a database where you can find or look online of bird-friendly coffee. Don't say shade-grown coffee, say bird-friendly coffee. And look up coffee companies that sell bird-friendly coffee that are certified through the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. Bird-friendly coffee is coffee that is grown in shade over native trees. So you're not removing that habitat like you saw in the picture. You're not removing that tropical forest to grow coffee. Coffee was traditionally grown in shade, and it was slower growing, and it provides a higher quality, better tasting coffee. And so before the 50s and 60s, everything was shade grown because it's the traditional way to grow it, and it tastes so much better. So look up bird-friendly coffee and buy bird-friendly coffee for everyone and yourself for the rest of your life. It's a minimal ask. So you can buy bird-friendly coffee. You can treat your windows where birds fly into your windows. If you have a window at your home or at your business, put stickers on the outside of that window. We can stop bird collisions, which are the second largest contributors to bird mortality. We can stop it today. So if you have a window or large windows at your business or home where birds fly into, treat that window, because you can stop it right now. And it makes an effort right now it's so cheap. It's such a cheap fix, and it makes a big, big difference. Keep your cats inside. I'll just mention that. Plant native plants all around your home and business. Native plants attract native insects, which that's the longest term thing you can do, I feel, in your yard or property for birds, because they come back every year. They take minimal maintenance. You see these massive mowed lawns, and I just can't handle it anymore. So if you have a massive mowed lawn and you can put it into native plants, please God do that, because it's the most impactful thing you can do for migratory birds, and not just birds, but lots of wildlife and many, many insects, which are also declining. So native plants are another one. So that's just a few, but there's other things like the 7 simple actions, which is at the 3billionbirds.org website. You can read about reducing plastics, reducing pesticides. I think that's most of them. Put your bird sightings on eBird, so you're contributing to bird tracking over the world, over the large scale.
Yes, I've got to add, think about where your food comes from.
Yes.
So when Sarah was talking about our tropical forest being deforested for various agricultural practices, such as grazing or palm oil, those food products eventually end up here in our supermarkets.
Yep. Also, there's bird-friendly beef. There's Audubon Conservation Ranching Program, and you can buy at local retailers in Missouri and parts of the state. Go to Audubon Conservation Ranching, just Google that, and there's a website you can look up where to buy it. But that's bird-friendly beef. It's ranchers adhering to bird-friendly habitat management practices, and then they get that Audubon name stamped right on the meat. So
Eric just put a good resource in the chat from FLAP, which is Canadian. Good, awesome long-term program. Stop birds from hitting windows.
Another thing I will say, Dana, is that as the holidays are approaching and we're all feeling very generous, I would do some research on NGOs who need your support. I can't list specific NGOs that you should support, but really do your research on these full life cycle bird conservation efforts. Look at your favorite Central American country, do some research on bird conservation NGOs in that country, and donate to them. Buy bird-friendly beef, buy bird-friendly coffee, and let's put our money where our mouth is and where our hearts are. Support groups like MRBO and Missouri Birding Society, your local bird conservation groups. I'm serious. I mean, like, it's just really important, both local and internationally. Like, there's something that all of us can do, even if it's $5-10. I mean, it all goes far. Good job, Katie Leonard. I agree.
Okay, we have a couple more Modus specific questions in the Q&A. Here's someone that definitely knows more than I do. For instance, if you have a station that requires a download but want to switch to the CTC that loads automatically, how much does that cost?
Ooh, that's a good question. So you can still use all the antennas and coax if you've placed those and you have a sensor gnome. The sensor station, it depends on what you buy with it. Depends on if you get the weatherproof case and all that stuff. And due to market restrictions because of COVID and supply chain things, it's increased by a few $100, but it's about $800-900 to buy a sensor station, and you just swap it out. You swap out the coax cables to the new station. So it's really, in the grand scheme, it's pretty affordable to swap. You may have a data transfer charge. You want to look into that, but it's not that much. And if you have an Ethernet connector to go right into the board, then you're just paying $5 a month to keep the CTT station on. And that's pretty minimal.
And our last couple questions are from Connie, who is the organizer of the Echo Bluff Festival I was telling you about before we got on this webinar, Sarah.
Yeah.
Connie's asking, where will new stations be added in the Ozark area, Current River, Sinking Creek, Eminent, Salem?
Connie, I will put them wherever you can find me a high point on the landscape where you can place a mast and antennas. So you should reach out to me, because that's the tough part, especially in the Ozarks. Oh my God, I have tried really hard to look at high points in the landscape in the Ozarks without trees. Turns out there aren't very many. And so you have to find structures that are already there, largely our communications towers or other communications towers. I tried going through American Tower, which is a huge cell tower company, and they charge about $3,000 a month to place anything on it. So that was not feasible. And so we need the location, I think, is the toughest part of Modus, is finding a high point on the landscape. Yes, you're talking about towers. That's great. I mean, towers are just a no-brainer in the Ozarks because they're already engineered to be at the high points. So yes, it depends on who owns the tower and who manages it. So yes, we can talk. Please shoot me an email and we can chat about that. But yes, I want more in the Ozarks. Fire towers are an option, yes. Angie, I'm so glad you guys are on here. So the fire towers are good, but sometimes they're overloaded. Sometimes they already have antennas on them, and the loading is an issue too. You can't put too many antennas on them. And the 166 antennas, which is the frequency that one of the frequencies that Modus runs on, they're very heavy antennas, and so you need to bear that in mind. And plus, you have to put your own power out there. And if you don't have a plug-in for power, you're going to have to place a solar panel up high above the trees so that it gets the sun. So there's just, in the Ozarks, there's just added fun challenges with all the trees. So, but we should talk.
Sounds like we can do a lot of good stuff with grassland birds, though, as Tom mentioned.
I agree.
So it looks like we are out of questions,
okay,
Sarah, and so we can let people go. I don't know about you, but I was super excited to see so many colleagues from different agencies and just all kinds of people that, we haven't seen in person in like a year and a half.
I know. I sent it to a lot of people across the Midwest that said, if you know anyone who's interested in Modus, send this to them. It's like a primer. And so I'm so glad to see so many people from so many different states. Thank you for attending. It's so nice. It's so nice to see you. And all the engagement and questions is so good.
All right, we'll let everybody go. Thanks, my friend.
Of course, thank you
for sticking with us.
Of course, thanks for all you do. Have a good holiday, everybody.